He buried his grandfather, thinking he was just a quiet, distant man. When his family laughed at his inheritance, a ruined clifftop home, he almost believed them. But his loyal canine partner, a dog who understood his heart better than any human, sensed a secret hidden in the stones. What they found wasn't just a room, it was a legacy. His grandfather wasn't a simple man. He was a hunter, and the monsters he spent a lifetime fighting are now coming for his bloodline. Before we begin, tell us where you are watching from. And if this story touches your heart, please subscribe for more. The city of Astoria, Oregon, clung to the mouth of the Columbia River under a blanket of lasting gray mist. It was a place where the air tasted of salt and damp earth, where the cries of gulls were a constant sad soundtrack to the steady mixing of the Pacific. Rain, more a fine drizzle than a downpour, made the historic streets shiny and painted the sky and sea in 1,000 shades of dark gray. It was the right mood for a funeral, and an even more fitting one for the reading of a will that felt just as cold and final. Inside the stuffy, wood-paneled office of Abernathy & Sons, the air was thick with the scent of old paper, lemon polish, and an easy-to-feel, simmering greed. Navy SEAL Adam Parker sat perfectly still in a hardback chair that groaned under his disciplined weight. On a brief leave from the non-stop motion of duty, he felt more out of place here than he ever had in the desert sands of Afghanistan or the humid jungles of some forgotten corner of the world. His suit, a necessary thing he had to wear for the occasion, felt like a cage around his lean, muscular frame, a body shaped by constant training into a weapon. His eyes, the color of a stormy sea, missed nothing, noticing the nervous twitches and greedy glances of his relatives with the same cool analysis he'd used to check a target. At the head of the long, mahogany table sat Mr. Abernathy, a man whose thinning gray hair and weary expression suggested he had been in charge of far too many of these family arguments. He peered over his spectacles, his voice a dry rustle of old paper as he began. "We are gathered to carry out the last will and testament of my client and friend, Elias Parker." A collective, almost tiny shift went through the room. Adam's Aunt Carol, a strict woman with a mouth permanently set in a thin line of disapproval, dabbed at her dry eyes with a tissue. Her son, David, sat beside her, his expensive suit stretched tight over a frame that had grown soft with a life of comfort and privilege. A smirk played at the corners of his lips as he caught Adam's eye, a look of smug pity that Adam had seen countless times before. To them, he was the son who had run off to play soldier, the odd one out who didn't understand the family's business or their quiet games of power. Mr. Abernathy cleared his throat and continued, his words falling like a judge's hammer strikes in the tense silence. "To my sister, Carol Parker, I leave the sum of $500,000 and my portfolio of municipal bonds." Carol's fake sadness vanished, replaced by a flicker of triumph. David patted her hand, his own smile widening. He was next, receiving an equal sum of cash and the family's vacation home in Sun River. The gifts continued, a careful giving out of a lifetime's gathered wealth. Each name read was a confirmation of Elias Parker's planned distance, a final counting of relationships that had been more like business deals than loving. Adam felt nothing. His grandfather had been a ghost in his life, a figure of myth and whispered rumor. Elias was a man who had taught a young Adam how to shoot a rifle with scary accuracy and track a deer through thick forest, yet had never shared a single story of his own past. He was a puzzle Adam had long ago given up trying to solve. Finally, Mr. Abernathy paused, adjusting his glasses as he looked down at the last page. "And to my grandson, Adam Parker." The room grew still. David leaned forward, his smirk turning into an expression of obviously looking down on him. What could be left for the outcast? A sentimental watch? A dusty collection of books? "I leave the whole of my property located at Tillamook Head, known as the Osprey's Nest, including the land and all buildings on it, to do with as he sees fit." A beat of silence, then a held-back snort came from David. "The Osprey's Nest," he scoffed, his voice loud in the quiet room. "You've got to be kidding me. That old junk?" Aunt Carol waved a waving away hand. "It's nothing, David. Just that old watchtower from the war. It's been rotting on that cliff for 50 years. David leaned back, shaking his head with fake pity. Congratulations, cousin. You inherited a pile of rust and concrete overlooking the sea. What are you going to do with that? Watch for Soviet submarines? The low chuckle that rippled through his side of the family was sharp and cruel. Adam's jaw tightened, but his expression remained a mask of calm, not caring. He had faced down men with guns and explosives. The small insults of his cousin were less than nuts in a hurricane. He simply nodded at Mr. Abernathy, a silent sign the meeting was over. As they filed out of the office, David clapped him on the shoulder, a move that was anything but friendly. Seriously, Adam, if you need a few bucks to pay the property taxes on your new fortress, just let me know. Family helps family, right? Adam met his gaze, his stormy eyes unblinking. I'll be fine, David. He stepped out of the building and into the cleaning coastal air. The drizzle had picked up, and the fog was rolling in thick from the sea, swallowing the tops of the Astoria-Megler Bridge in the distance. He stood for a moment, letting the cool mist settle on his face. The laughter and whispers from the office faded behind him, unimportant noise, the osprey's nest. He remembered his grandfather mentioning it only once years ago, a flicker of something unreadable in the old man's eyes. It was a place of being alone, a guard on the edge of the continent. Worthless, they had all said, a burden. But Elias Parker hadn't been a sentimental or foolish man. Every action he took, every word he spoke, was on purpose, weighed with a purpose that few could understand. Leaving him this forgotten legacy. It wasn't an insult. It was a message, a final puzzle from the ultimate mystery man. He walked to his worn but reliable Ford pickup parked down the street. As he opened the driver's side door, a massive, intelligent head lifted from the passenger seat. Ragnar, his German shepherd, looked at him with steady loyalty. The dog's powerful body, a mix of black and tan fur, was coiled with the hidden energy of a warrior at rest. A veteran of 2 tours himself, Ragnar had been Adam's partner, his shadow, and the only living soul who understood the silence that often surrounded him. The dog let out a low, questioning whine. Adam slid into the driver's seat, the familiar scent of dog and worn leather a comfort. He reached over and scratched behind Ragnar's alert ears, the dog leaning into his touch. "Well, boy," Adam said, his voice low, the first words he'd spoken in over an hour. "Looks like our leave just got interesting." He turned the key, and the truck's engine rumbled to life, a sharp difference to the quiet hiss of the rain on the windshield. He didn't look back at the law office or the city filled with a family that had never understood him. Instead, he pulled away from the curb and headed south toward the winding coastal highway, toward the cliffs, and toward a pile of rust and concrete that held the last secret of a man he had barely known. He had a feeling the osprey's nest was more than just a forgotten piece of junk. It was a key, and he was going to find the lock it opened. The highway south of Astoria became a winding ribbon of wet asphalt, hugging the dramatic curves of the Oregon coast. The Ford pickup, a strong beast against the weather, climbed steadily into the hills, leaving the city lights to dissolve into the thick, rolling fog behind them. The higher they went, the wilder the land became. Towering Douglas firs, their branches heavy with rain, crowded the roadside, forming a dark, living tunnel. The roar of the Pacific, once a distant murmur, grew into a thundering, always-there heartbeat that vibrated through the floor of the truck. Ragnar, who had been resting his head on the center console, suddenly lifted his snout, his ears turning to catch a scent on the wind. He let out a low growl, a deep rumble in his chest. "Easy, boy," Adam murmured, his hand instinctively going to the dog's ruff. "We're almost there." He turned off the main highway onto a narrow, unmarked service road, nearly swallowed by ferns and bushes. The asphalt gave way to gravel, and the final mile was a hard climb up a path that was more of a scar on the mountainside than a road. Finally, through a break in the trees and the swirling mist, he saw it. The osprey's nest. It wasn't a house. It was a statement. Perched on the very edge of a sheer cliff, it was a rough mix of weathered wood and stained concrete, designed to survive the full anger of a Pacific gale. It looked less like a home and more like a World War II bunker that had stubbornly decided to grow a cabin on its back. The windows were narrow slits, like the eyes of a fortress. A wide deck, its railings bleached to the color of bone, stuck out over the churning deep pit below. It was isolated, impressive, and magnificent. Adam parked the truck in a small clearing and cut the engine. The only sounds were the wind whipping around the building and the crash of waves hundreds of feet below. Ragnar was already out of the truck, his body tense, his nose working overtime as he circled the outside. Adam's own senses were on high alert. He wasn't seeing an inheritance. He was checking a battle position. The location offered a near 360-degree field of view. The single access road was a natural narrow spot. Any approach would be seen miles before it arrived. He walked to the front door, a heavy slab of timber that looked ancient. But his trained eye caught the details. The frame was reinforced steel, and the lock was a heavy-duty deadbolt, far stronger than necessary for a simple cabin. He used the old brass key Mr. Abernathy had given him. The lock turned with a well-oiled click, and the door swung inward without a sound. The air inside was still and cool, carrying the faint, clean scent of cedar and sea salt. Dust motes danced in the pale light filtering through the narrow windows. The main room was simple: 2 worn leather armchairs, a simple wooden table, and a bookshelf filled with books on sea history, star navigation, and military strategy. But what filled the space was the fireplace. It was a giant structure of dark river-rounded stones taking up nearly an entire wall. Its hearth was large enough to stand in. As Adam did a slow, careful check of the room, Ragnar ignored everything else. The dog trotted directly to the massive fireplace and stopped. He whined a high, anxious sound and paced back and forth before the hearth. Then he began to scratch, his powerful claws clicking, without stopping, against one of the large, flat stones that formed the base. "Ragnar, what is it?" Adam said quietly, coming to stand behind him. The dog didn't stop. He looked up at Adam, let out a sharp, commanding bark, and went back to scratching. His entire body was focused, his canine training resurfacing from a deep, instinctual place. He wasn't chasing a mouse. He was indicating, trust the dog. It was the first rule of working with a canine partner. Adam knelt down, running his hands over the stone Ragnar was focused on. It felt the same as the others, cold and solid. But as he pressed along its edges, his fingers found a seam, almost invisible to the eye. It wasn't cemented in place. He pushed. Nothing. He tried to slide it. It wouldn't budge. This was a puzzle. He examined the fancy pattern of the surrounding stones, looking for a trigger, a switch. His gaze fell upon a smaller, fist-sized stone embedded in the mantelpiece above. It was carved with a faint, fancy knot, a Celtic design that seemed out of place. He pressed it. A low, deep thump echoed from within the fireplace, and the stone at his knees moved back an inch with a soft hiss of displaced air. Adam used his fingertips to pull it away, revealing not a hollow space, but a small, sunken-in hole. Inside was a tarnished steel panel with a single, plain keyhole. It was not for a house key, but for a smaller, more special key. He thought for a moment, then reached into his wallet. Tucked away in a hidden flap was a small, flat key he had carried for years, given to him by his grandfather on his 18th birthday. "For a box you may one day need to open," was all Elias had said. Adam had never found the box, until now. With a steady hand he inserted the key. It fit perfectly. He turned it, and a series of heavy internal locking bolts loudly pulled back deep within the wall. The entire section of the stone hearth, a piece of solid rock weighing hundreds of pounds, swung inward as smoothly and silently as a bank vault door. It revealed a flight of steep metal steps descending into absolute darkness. A wave of cool, dry air washed over him, carrying the scent of ozone, gun oil, and old machinery. This was no wine cellar. Adam grabbed a heavy flashlight from his pack and clicked it on. Ragnar stayed at the top of the stairs, a silent, watchful guardian. Adam descended, his boots clanging softly on the metal rungs. At the bottom, he swept the beam of light across the space, and his breath caught in his throat. He was standing in a miniature command center. The room was a concrete-lined vault, about 20 feet square. One wall was lined with racks of firearms, rifles, shotguns, and handguns, all very carefully cleaned and stored in climate-controlled cases. Below them were crates of ammunition. Another wall was a bank of old-style radio equipment, shortwave radios, signal coders, and monitoring devices that looked like they belonged in a Cold War spy film. A large world map was pinned to the third wall, dotted with pins and marked with faded handwritten notes in a code he didn't recognize. In the center of the room stood a heavy steel desk. On it, a vintage telegraph key sat beside a modern satellite phone. And against the far wall were glass display cases, filled not with valuables, but with old objects, an ornate curved dagger with a jade handle, a collection of passports from a dozen different countries, all bearing his grandfather's photograph under a variety of names. A simple leather-bound book was resting on a velvet cloth. Adam stood in the center of the vault, the beam of his flashlight drifting over the unbelievable collection. This was his grandfather's secret life. This was the real Elias Parker, not just a reclusive old man, but a spy, an operative, a man who lived a life of shadows and secrets. The inheritance wasn't a rundown cabin on a cliff. It was a legacy, and he was standing right in the middle of it. Time seemed to warp inside the concrete vault. Adam moved with the deliberate, careful movement ingrained in him by years of training. His flashlight beam cut precise swaths through the darkness. He did a full sweep first, checking corners, ensuring he was truly alone, that there were no hidden alarms or traps his initial inspection had missed. Satisfied, his attention returned to the objects that represented the broken story of his grandfather's life. His gaze settled on the heavy steel desk. Among the strange collection of old objects, one item seemed more personal, more direct, a small steel lockbox. Its surface was empty of any decoration. Beside it lay the simple, leather-bound book. But the box felt like the chosen starting point. It was secured with a sturdy combination lock. Adam examined it closely. It was a 4-digit lock, military grade. He thought for a moment, his mind thinking of possibilities. Birthdays? Addresses? Too simple. Elias Parker was never simple. He thought about numbers that were significant to him. Adam, the day he enlisted, the day he graduated from BUDS training. He tried the date he had earned his SEAL Trident. The tumblers clicked into place. The lock sprang open with a soft, metallic sigh. Elias had known. He had always been watching. Inside, resting on a bed of faded velvet, was a single, thick envelope made of heavy paper. His name, Adam, was written across the front in his grandfather's distinctive, sharp handwriting. With a sense of respect, he lifted the envelope. It felt heavy, weighted with more than just paper. He broke the wax seal and unfolded the single sheet within. The letter began without introduction. Adam, if you are reading this, then you have found your way past the stone and the steel. And I was right about you. I was always right about you. Trust the dog. He sees the world more clearly than most men. What you see around you is not a treasure. Do not think of it in terms of money, for that is a fool's measure of worth. This room is a legacy. It is a collection of tools, secrets, and stories, gathered over a lifetime spent in the shadows. Its purpose is single, to protect those who cannot protect themselves. There are wolves in this world, son, who prey on the trusting. I spent my life hunting them. These walls hold the teeth I used. My passing will not have gone unnoticed. The quiet I maintained for the last decade was a carefully made-up story. Old enemies, old rivals will stir. They will see my death as an opportunity to claim what they believe is theirs. They will come for this place. They will come for what is inside it. Do not underestimate them. They are ruthless, and they will see you as nothing more than a thing in the way. This is not a burden I give you lightly. It is a choice. You can lock this room, walk away, and live the life you have earned. No one would blame you. Or you can take up the work. The choice is yours and yours alone. The truest battles are not fought on any known battlefield. The answers you need, the history you deserve to know, are in the leather journal on this desk. It is the key to everything. But like any key, it is useless until you learn how to turn it. Be careful who you trust. The world is more complicated than it appears on the surface. Your grandfather, Elias. Adam read the letter twice, the words sinking in, rearranging the entire foundation of his world. The quiet, stern man who taught him to fish on the Columbia River was a hunter of wolves. This wasn't just an inheritance, it was a recruitment. He folded the letter carefully and placed it in his jacket pocket. He turned his attention to the leather-bound book. It was old, the cover worn smooth at the edges. He opened it. The pages were filled not with words, but with dense, fancy script. It was a labyrinth of symbols, numbers, and strange, angular characters, all handwritten with very careful precision. It was a code, but more complex than any military code he had ever encountered. This was a custom-designed, layered system, a lifetime's work of hiding. He knew instantly he was out of his depth. He spent another hour in the vault, cataloging the contents in his mind before climbing the stairs. He swung the heavy stone door shut, hearing the deep thud of the locks engaging, and slid the hearthstone back into place. Ragnar, who had been waiting patiently, came over and nudged his hand, sensing the shift in his master. For the next 2 days, Adam worked, his mind processing. He created a detailed mental map of the vault, memorized the layout of the weapons, and spent hours staring at a digital photo he'd taken of one of the journal's pages, trying to find a pattern, a foothold. Nothing. He couldn't bring this to his bosses. This was outside any official channel, a ghost operation left by a ghost. He needed an expert, a specialist, someone who wouldn't ask the wrong questions. His research led him to the Columbia River Maritime Museum, a well-respected institution in the heart of Astoria. He found an article about their lead historian, a Dr. Elena Hayes, a specialist in naval history and, more importantly, a recognized expert in historical code-breaking. She had recently put together an exhibit on coded communications used in the Pacific during World War II. It was a long shot, but it was the only one he had. He found her in a brightly lit archive room at the back of the museum, a space that smelled of aging paper and preservation chemicals. She was leaning over a massive salt-stained ship's log, a magnifying glass in one hand. Dr. Elena Hayes was not what he had expected. She had sharp, intelligent green eyes that seemed to miss nothing, and dark, wavy hair pulled back into a messy but functional knot, with a few stray strands framing a face that was more striking than classically beautiful. She wore a simple blouse and jeans, a smudge of archival dust on her cheek. She looked up as he approached, her expression one of polite, focused inquiry. "Can I help you?" Her voice was clear and direct. "Dr. Hayes," Adam began, his tone quiet and measured. "My name is Adam Parker. I was told you might be able to help me with a historical document." She put down her magnifying glass, giving him her full attention. She took in his athletic build, his military short hair, and the quiet intensity in his eyes. She was used to dealing with academics and history buffs. This man was something else entirely. "I specialize in maritime history," she said, a hint of doubt in her tone. "What kind of document are you referring to?" "It's a private family journal," Adam said, choosing his words with care. "My grandfather kept it. The thing is, it's written in some kind of code." He pulled out his phone and showed her the photo of the journal page. Elena leaned in, her professional curiosity instantly overriding her initial caution. Her green eyes narrowed, scanning the complex symbols. A flicker of intense concentration crossed her features. She was silent for a long moment, completely absorbed. "This isn't a standard code," she murmured, almost to herself. "It has elements of a visionaire cipher, but it's layered. The base symbols, they're not from any known alphabet. This is a custom-made system, highly sophisticated. Whoever created this was brilliant and paranoid." She looked up at him, her eyes alight with a smart fire. "Where did you say this came from?" "My grandfather," Adam repeated. "He was a private man." For the first time since he'd found the vault, Adam saw a path forward. He also saw a complication. There was an immediate, unspoken connection between them, a shared wavelength of focus and intensity. But he knew that bringing her into this was a risk. He was asking her to step into the shadows that had defined his grandfather's life. "I need someone to help me understand it," Adam said, his gaze holding hers. "Someone I can trust." Elena leaned back, studying his face. He wasn't just a man with a puzzle. There was a weight to him, a sense of danger and purpose that both interested and warned her. The academic in her was screaming to take on the challenge. The rational part of her brain was telling her to run. "A project like this would be time-consuming," she said slowly, "and I'd need to see the original document." "I can arrange that," Adam said. She made her decision. The mystery was too compelling to resist. "All right, Mr. Parker," she said, a small smile touching her lips. "You have my attention. Let's see what secrets your grandfather was hiding." Adam drove Elena up the winding private road to the Osprey's Nest as the afternoon sun began its slow descent, painting the undersides of the heavy clouds in shades of orange and bruised purple. As the impressive building came into view, perched on the edge of the world, Elena let out a low whistle. "You weren't kidding when you said it was remote," she said, her green eyes wide as she took in the stark lines of the concrete and wood fortress. "It looks like it's holding on for dear life." "It was built to hold on," Adam replied, parking the truck. "Let's hope it still can." Inside, he led her down the metal steps into the vault. The moment Elena saw the command center, her academic curiosity transformed into pure, total wonder. She walked slowly around the room, running a hand over the cold steel of the radio equipment and peering at the strange old objects in their cases. "My God," she breathed. This is a private intelligence archive." "Your grandfather was more than he seemed," Adam finished for her, placing the heavy leather journal on the steel desk. "This is what I need you to look at." For the next few hours, they were a study and focused working together. Elena, with her brilliant problem-solving mind, dove into the code. She spread out her notes, cross-referencing symbols, testing theories, her brow furrowed in concentration. Adam sat opposite her, a silent, watchful presence. He couldn't follow the fancy dance of her code-breaking analysis, but he could provide context, answering her questions about military jargon or geographical locations he recognized from the map on the wall. A strange closeness grew between them. In the cool, still air of the vault, a connection forged over a dead man's secrets. "I'm starting to see a pattern," Elena said, her voice filled with the thrill of discovery. It's a polyalphabetic substitution cipher, but the key isn't a word. It's a sequence of numbers, derived from a set of coordinates. The coordinates change every 5 pages, and I think they correspond to the pins on that map." She pointed to the wall, and Adam felt a surge of respect for her intellect. She was unlocking a lifetime of secrets in a matter of hours. It was Ragnar who shattered the quiet focus. From the top of the stairs in the main room, a low, deep growl rumbled through the floor plates. It wasn't a warning bark, but something deeper, more menacing. Adam was on his feet in a split second. His entire way he acted shifting from quiet partner to ready hunter. "Stay here," he commanded Elena in a low, urgent voice. He moved up the stairs, Ragnar meeting him at the top. The fur on his back was ridged. The dog wasn't looking toward the door or the road, but toward the thick, misty forest that bordered the property to the east. Adam moved to one of the narrow windows, his body pressed against the wall, and peered out. For a moment he saw nothing but the swaying trees and the deepening twilight. Then a flicker of movement, a glint of light that didn't belong. The reflection of an optical lens. Someone was out there, watching them. High-powered surveillance. This wasn't a casual trespasser. His grandfather's words echoed in his mind. "They will come for this place." "Elena," he called down, his voice calm but hard as iron, "lock the vault door from the inside. There's a deadbolt on the frame. Do not open it for any reason until I come back. Do you understand?" He heard her frightened but firm. "Yes." The heavy thud of the vault door locking echoed up the stairs. Adam turned to his dog. "Ragnar, watch the house." The dog seemed to understand perfectly, planting himself in the center of the room, facing the door. A silent, impressive guardian. Adam slipped out a side door, melting into the shadows like a ghost. He moved with a silence that defied his size, using the terrain, the rocks, the thick undergrowth, as his ally. He didn't take the direct route, but circled wide, coming upwind, his senses analyzing every snapped twig, every rustle of leaves. The fog was his friend, muffling sound and cloaking his approach. After 10 minutes of silent, painstaking movement, he spotted him. The man was a professional. He wore dark, practical, tactical gear and was positioned in a sniper's nest of ferns and fallen logs about 200 yards from the house. A high-powered spotting scope was mounted on a tripod, and a camera with a telephoto lens lay beside him. He was patient, focused, his attention entirely on the osprey's nest. Adam crept closer until he was less than 15 feet away, hidden behind the trunk of an ancient fir. He could make out the man's features now, a hard, lean face, a scar cutting through one eyebrow, and an earpiece that was barely visible. He was part of a team. Adam didn't announce himself. He didn't issue a challenge. He exploded from the tree line, a blur of motion. The mercenary, for all his professionalism, was caught completely by surprise. He barely had time to turn before Adam was on him. It wasn't a fight. It was a fast, clean takedown. Adam's hand chopped down on the man's wrist, sending the camera clattering to the ground. A palm heel strike to the jaw snapped the man's head back, and a swift leg sweep took him off his feet. He landed with a grunt, the air driven from his lungs. Before he could recover, Adam had a knee on his chest and the cold, hard edge of his combat knife against the man's throat. "Who do you work for?" Adam's voice was a lethal whisper. The man's eyes were wide with shock and pain, but also with a flicker of professional respect. He just glared, spitting a glob of blood onto the damp earth. "Talk," Adam pressed the knife's edge, indenting the skin, "or your team will find what the forest animals leave behind." The man just smirked, but his eyes darted for a split second to his left. A signal. He was trying to buy time for his partner. Adam didn't hesitate. He slammed the handle end of his knife against the man's temple, not enough to kill, but enough to knock him out for a good long while. He quickly and efficiently zip-tied the man's hands and feet, gagged him with a piece of his own shirt, and disabled his communications gear. He then faded back into the woods as silently as he had appeared. He returned to the house, the cold reality of the situation settling over him. He knocked on the stone hearth. "Elena, it's me." The vault door unlatched, and she emerged, her face pale but her eyes resolute. "What happened?" "We have uninvited guests," Adam said, his voice grim. "My grandfather was right." Without another word, he went to a master control panel hidden behind a loose bookshelf. He flipped a series of heavy switches. With a low hum, power surged through the house. Steel shutters, previously invisible, slid down over the narrow windows, plunging the room into near darkness. A series of soft clicks from the perimeter indicated that motion sensors and magnetic locks had been activated. The Osprey's nest was no longer a cabin. It was a lockdown facility. He turned to Elena, who was watching him, her arms wrapped around herself. He saw the fear in her eyes, but also a spark of fierce determination. "They'll be back," he said simply. "You need to be able to protect yourself." He led her to the center of the room. "I'm not going to teach you how to fight. I'm going to teach you how to survive an attack, how to create an opportunity to escape." For the next hour, under the dim emergency lights of the secured house, he taught her. He showed her how to break a grip, where to strike for maximum effect, the eyes, the throat, the groin, and how to use her smaller size as an advantage. There was a new level of intimacy in his touch, no longer just intellectual or emotional, but fiercely protective. He would position her hands, guide her movements, his voice a low, steady murmur in her ear. She was a quick study, her mind absorbing the brutal logic of his lessons. When they finished, they stood in the silent, fortified room. The only sound was the wind howling outside the steel-shuttered windows. They were locked in together, a team forged by a dead man's secrets and a very real present danger. The mystery had become a fight for survival. The night inside the Osprey's nest was a world unto itself. With the steel shutters locked down, all sense of time was lost. The only light came from a few humming emergency lamps that cast long, dancing shadows. The only sound was the incessant, muffled roar of the wind and waves, a constant reminder of their isolation. Adam had retrieved the mercenaries' high-powered radio from the woods, and it now sat on the table, a silent trophy from their first encounter. Elena, her initial fear replaced by a steely resolve, worked at the desk in the vault, her mind a refuge from the oppressive tension. Adam moved with a quiet, restless energy, checking the strength of the shutters, monitoring the perimeter sensors. He was in his element, a defined battle space, a clear threat, and a single objective: protect the person and things that mattered. In this case, that was both the vault's secrets and the brilliant woman trying to unlock them. Just after midnight, the satellite phone on his grandfather's desk in the vault buzzed to life, a harsh, strange sound in the stillness. It wasn't ringing. It was a secure, coded comms link request. Adam descended the stairs, his face a mask of stone. He gestured for Elena to stay silent as he answered. A voice, smooth and fancy, with a faint, unplaceable European accent, filled the small space. It was a voice used to command, laced with the easy confidence of a man who rarely heard the word no. "Mr. Parker, Adam, I trust you've had a chance to appreciate your grandfather's rustic taste in real estate." "Who is this?" Adam's voice was flat, betraying nothing, a low, amused chuckle. "My name is Marcus Thorne. Your grandfather and I were old colleagues, competitors, you might say. I have a deep and lasting respect for Elias. He was a master of his craft, which is why I'm calling you directly, as a courtesy. Marcus Thorne." The name was unfamiliar, but the tone was not. It was the sound of a predator circling. "Elias collected things," Thorne continued, his voice like silk sliding over steel. "Things of historical and, more importantly, financial significance. He was a pack rat of secrets. I am prepared to offer you $5 million in cash for the property and its entire contents. No questions asked. You can walk away a wealthy man, free to continue your admirable service to your country. A simple, clean transaction." It wasn't an offer. It was a threat wrapped in a business proposal. Thorne knew about the vault. He knew what was inside. "The property is not for sale," Adam said, his words clipped and final. The silence on the other end stretched, no longer friendly. When Thorne spoke again, the silk was gone, leaving only the cold, hard steel beneath. "That is a regrettable decision, Mr. Parker. Your grandfather was a formidable man, but he made the mistake of growing old. You are making the mistake of being sentimental. I will acquire what is mine. The only variable is how much blood is spilled in the process. Consider your position carefully." The line went dead. Adam looked at Elena, whose eyes were wide with a mixture of fear and defiance. "Marcus Thorne," he said, the name tasting like ash. "He's our wolf. The attack came 3 hours later, in the deepest part of the night. Ragnar gave the first warning, a low growl that vibrated through the floor. The perimeter sensors on the access road lit up on the control panel. 2 vehicles, moving without headlights. "They're here," Adam said, his voice dropping into a combat-ready calm. He handed Elena a radio. "Stay in the vault. You'll be safe there. Just keep working. Getting into that journal is our best weapon now." He moved to the main room, Ragnar at his heels, a shadow of lethal intent. Adam watched the sensor display. The attackers weren't trying to be subtle. This was a direct assault meant to overwhelm. He waited until their heat signatures were clustered at the narrowest point of the road, a place where a rock slide had created a natural bottleneck years ago. Then he pressed a red button on the control panel. A deep, booming echo came from the hillside. Not an explosion of fire, but a directional charge, a calculated explosion. Tons of rock and earth, loosened by the charge his grandfather had evidently placed long ago, fell down, completely blocking the road. The assault by vehicle was over, but Adam knew this was just the opening move. Thorne's men were professionals. The radio crackled. It was Elena, her voice tight but clear. "Adam, there's something else. The old sonar equipment down here, it's picking up something. Small signatures in the water at the base of the cliff. Climbers. Of course, a 2-part attack." "How many?" Adam asked, moving to the armored deck door. "I think 4, maybe 5. They're ascending." "Good work, Elena. Keep me updated." He unlatched the heavy door and stepped out onto the jutting deck, into the teeth of the gale. The wind and rain were a physical force tearing at him. Below, the Pacific was a chaos of black water and white foam. He clipped a safety harness to a steel ring embedded in the deck and leaned over the edge. Through the mist, he saw them. 4 figures in dark climbing gear, moving with practiced skill up the sheer rock face, using ropes and pitons. They were still 100 feet below, but they were moving fast. Adam didn't use a firearm. The sound would give away his position too easily. Instead, he retrieved a heavy coil of fire hose from a storage locker on the deck. He braced himself, aimed the nozzle over the edge, and cranked the valve. A high-pressure torrent of frigid ocean water, pulled by a powerful pump from the sea below, slammed into the rock face. It was like a localized tsunami. The lead climber, caught completely off guard, lost his grip and was swept from the cliff, his shout swallowed by the storm. His safety line caught him, but he was left dangling, unable to move. The others flattened themselves against the rock, trying to ride out the flood. It bought him time. He could hear them shouting, their plan in disarray. He secured the hose and moved back inside, Ragnar growling at the cliffside windows. They knew they had been discovered. Their only option now was to try and breach the deck. One of the climbers, more daring than the rest, managed to get a grappling hook over the deck railing. A moment later, a dark figure vaulted onto the deck, a suppressed pistol in his hand. He never saw Ragnar. The dog shot out from the doorway, a 90-pound missile of fur and fury. He hit the man squarely in the chest, sending him crashing backward against the railing. The pistol flew from his grasp and skittered across the wet wood. Before the man could recover, Adam was on him, a swift, disabling blow rendering him unconscious. The assault was broken. The remaining climbers, their leader gone and their element of surprise lost, began a hasty retreat back down the cliff face. Adam dragged the unconscious man inside and secured him. The immediate threat was over, but a chilling realization settled over him. Thorn hadn't just attacked the house. He had targeted its occupants. He knew Adam wasn't alone. Helena was no longer just a consultant. She was a target. Her quiet life in Astoria, her job at the museum, it was all in danger. He went down to the vault. Helena was standing by the desk, her face pale, but her eyes blazing. She had listened to the entire ordeal over the radio. "They're gone," he said. "For now," she just nodded, her throat too tight for words. "You can't go back to your apartment," he stated, his voice leaving no room for argument. "It's the first place they'll look for you now. You're not safe anywhere but here." She looked around the cold concrete room, then back at him. She saw the absolute certainty in his stormy eyes, the fierce protective instinct that had taken root. This place, this fortress on the edge of the world, had become her only safe place. And the man standing before her, a soldier forged in the world's most dangerous places, was its keeper. Her keeper. "Okay," she whispered. The single word sealed their alliance, transforming them from partners into something more, something deeper, forged in secrets and shared danger. The days that followed the assault bled into one another, marked not by the rising and setting of the sun, which they couldn't see through the steel shutters, but by the rhythm of their work. The Osprey's nest became their entire world, a fortified island against a sea of unseen enemies. Adam established a routine with military precision. He patrolled the perimeter at dawn and dusk, checked the strength of their defenses, and spent hours cleaning and field stripping the weapons from the vault, his movements fluid and economical. He was a silent, watchful guardian, and his calm presence was a steadying anchor in the tense quiet. Helena, meanwhile, waged her own war in the silence of the vault. She was fueled by black coffee and a fierce, burning curiosity. The journal was her adversary, a puzzle box built by a ghost, and she attacked it with relentless intellect. The initial breakthrough had been exciting, but the layers of the code were more complex than she could have imagined. Elias had woven multiple code-breaking methods together using shifting keys based not only on map coordinates, but on astronomical charts and obscure historical dates. She had to cross-reference from the books on the shelves. It was a very hard process. There were moments of profound frustration where she would push back from the desk, her eyes burning, ready to give up. In those moments, Adam would appear with a fresh mug of coffee or a plate of food, saying nothing, his steady presence enough to give her the strength to dive back in. He watched her, amazed by the toughness of her mind, the way she battled with symbols and patterns as fiercely as he would battle a physical enemy. Then, on the fourth day, she broke through. "Adam!" she called, her voice echoing up the metal stairs, laced with a mixture of exhaustion and pure triumph. "I've got it. I found the primary key." He was down the stairs in an instant. She pointed to a page in her notebook, a chaotic scroll of symbols and equations that resolved into a single, elegant sequence. It wasn't just the map, she explained, her green eyes shining with intellectual fire. It was a three-part key. The map coordinates gave him the base cipher. The star charts from an old mariner's almanac gave him the transposition index. and the final piece, the publication date of a first edition copy of Moby Dick on the shelf upstairs. It was a lock with 3 separate keys. With the primary key, the journal began to surrender its secrets. The first few dozen pages were a revelation. They were not the ramblings of a spy, but the very careful records of a protector. Elias Parker had been part of an unofficial, secret network, a group of like-minded individuals from various intelligence agencies who operated outside of any government permission. They called themselves the Sentinels. They didn't fight wars. They hunted monsters. The entries detailed missions that were the stuff of fiction, the recovery of priceless old objects stolen by war criminals in the chaos after the fall of the Berlin Wall, the rescue of a scientist's family from a rogue state, the taking apart of a human trafficking ring that operated in the shadowy ports of Southeast Asia. Each entry was concise, detailing the objective, the method, and the outcome, followed by a personal reflection. Adam saw his grandfather in a new light, not just as a spy, but as a man driven by a profound, strong sense of right and wrong. He was a hero, Elena whispered, reading over his shoulder. He was a soldier, Adam corrected softly, though he understood what she meant. They worked late into the night, translating page after page. They learned of Marcus Thorne, an ex-MI6 agent who had been one of the founding Sentinels. Thorne had been brilliant, charming, but ultimately made bad by greed. He believed the old objects they recovered, the secrets they unearthed, should be sold to the highest bidder, not returned or protected. He had tried to seize control of the network, and when he failed, he was kicked out, becoming their most bitter enemy. He had been hunting Elias and his legacy ever since. Then Elena's finger stopped on a specific entry, dated nearly a year ago. It was the last one, written in a slightly less steady hand. Thorne is closing in. The years have taken their toll. I cannot run forever. I have moved the heart of our work, the final protection, to the place where the sea wages its endless war against the stone. It is a place of terrible light and enduring shadow. He will not think to look there, not at first. For Adam, the rest of the story waits at 45-56-19 and 124-06. Bellevue. Adam felt a chill run down his spine. He knew those coordinates. Every sailor and fisherman on the Oregon coast knew them. Tillamook Rock Lighthouse, he said, his voice a low whisper. Elena quickly typed the coordinates into her laptop. A satellite image appeared on the screen, showing an empty, guano-streaked basalt sea stack about a mile off the coast, crowned by a squat, decommissioned lighthouse. Even in the grainy photo, it looked menacing. They call it Terrible Tilly, Elena said, reading from an article. One of the most infamous lighthouses in the world. Dozens of keepers went mad from the isolation and the storms. It was decommissioned in the 1950s. It's a private tomb now, a storage place for cremated remains. It's supposed to be almost impossible to reach, except on the calmest of days. The place where the sea wages its endless war against the stone, Adam quoted from the journal. It's him. It has to be. A new dangerous energy filled the vault. This was it. The next move. It's a trap, Adam said, his mind already shifting into operational planning mode. Thorne may not have known about it before, but if he's been tracking my grandfather's recent movements, he may have figured it out. He'll either be waiting for us or he'll follow us there. So what do we do? Elena asked, her gaze steady on his. We go, Adam said without hesitation. But we go prepared. We go on our terms. The next 24 hours were a blur of intense preparation. Adam laid out a selection of weapons on the steel desk. A suppressed Sig Sauer P226, a compact M4 carbine, and his combat knife. He packed a tactical go bag with night vision goggles, medical supplies, breaching tools, and climbing gear. He knew the landing at the lighthouse would be dangerous. They would have to scale part of the rock to reach the entrance. He needed a boat. Not a fishing charter from the marina. That would be too easy to spot. He remembered an entry in his grandfather's journal about a trusted contact in the nearby fishing town of Garibaldi, a man named Silas, an old Navy boatswain's mate who owed Elias his life. While Adam planned the tactical approach, Elena worked on a different problem. She packed her own go bag with her laptop, a satellite modem, and all her notes. Her job would be to act as their overwatch, their communications and intelligence hub. That evening, as a storm began to brew offshore, they stood together on the deck, the steel shutters pulled back for the first time in days. The wind was cold and sharp, whipping Elena's hair across her face. "Are you sure about this, Elena?" Adam asked, his voice low over the sound of the wind. "This is far beyond what you signed up for." She turned to him, her green eyes clear and unwavering in the fading light. "Your grandfather wrote that he protected people who couldn't protect themselves. What he started, what Thorne is trying to steal. It's important. I can't walk away from that now." "We can't." In that moment, standing on the edge of the cliff with a storm brewing inside and out, he saw her, not as an academic he had dragged into his world, but as a partner, an equal. He reached out and gently brushed a stray strand of hair from her cheek, his touch lingering for a second longer than necessary. It was a small gesture, but it held the weight of everything they had been through and everything that was to come. "Okay," he said. "We go at dawn." The fishing town of Garibaldi huddled against the bay under a sky the color of wet stone. The air was thick with the smells of diesel, salt, and fish. Adam found Silas down at the docks, a man who looked as though he'd been carved from the same salt-sprayed timber as his boat. Silas was old, with a face like a map of hills from a hard life. His hands were lumpy and powerful from a lifetime of hauling nets. His eyes, a pale, washed-out blue, held the quiet wisdom of a man who understood the sea's changing temperament. When Adam mentioned Elias Parker's name, Silas's weathered face softened just for a moment. "Elias pulled me out of the water off the coast of Da Nang when I was not much older than you are now," he said, his voice a low, rough rumble. "Whatever you need, son, you've got it." An hour before dawn, under the cover of a brewing storm, Silas's sturdy fishing boat, the Sea Serpent, slipped out of the harbor. Adam, Elena, and Ragnar were huddled in the small cabin. Silas expertly navigated the churning, dark gray waves that grew more monstrous as they left the relative shelter of the coast. The journey was a brutal, hard time. The boat was tossed mercilessly, and the roar of the wind and water was deafening. "She's a nasty one today," Silas yelled over the engine's groan. "They call her Terrible Tilly for a reason. The sea never gives her up easy." As they approached the sea stack, Tillamook Rock rose from the waves like a jagged black tooth. The lighthouse, squat and defiant, seemed to be fused to its peak. Waves crashed against its base with explosive force, sending plumes of white spray hundreds of feet into the air. There was no dock, only a small, rusted crane and a sheer rock face. "This is as close as I can get," Silas shouted, skillfully holding the boat steady against the violent swell. "The rest is up to you." Adam worked with grim efficiency. He secured a line to Ragnar's harness and, with Elena's help, lowered the dog into a waterproof, inflatable raft. He and Elena followed, paddling. The final 100 yards was a battle against an evil current that threatened to smash them against the rocks. When they finally reached the base, Adam secured the raft and began the ascent, free-climbing the first 20 feet with practiced ease before setting a line for Elena and hauling up their gear. They found the entrance, a heavy iron door set deep into the rock, its surface pitted and rusted by a century of salt and storms. It was locked with a massive, ancient padlock. Adam didn't waste time trying to pick it. He used a small hydraulic tool from his pack, and the shackle snapped with a sharp crack. The air that rushed out from within was cold and smelled of stone, decay, and the faint, ghostly scent of lamp oil. Inside, the lighthouse was a hollow, round tomb. A spiral staircase of rusting iron clung to the damp, curving wall, climbing into darkness. They moved upwards, their flashlight beams cutting through the gloom, revealing peeling paint and the ghosts of a life long abandoned. At the very top, in the lantern room, they found it. The wind howled and screamed against the thick glass panes, which were covered in tiny cracks, but miraculously still holding. In the center of the room, bolted to the floor, was a heavy, sea-worn wooden chest. Adam knelt and examined the lock. It was a complex, multi-tumbler mechanism, but there was no keyhole. Instead, there was a small, ornate compass, rose inlaid on the lid. Adam remembered the knot on the fireplace stone. This was another puzzle. He turned the rose, listening. He felt more than heard the subtle clicks of the tumblers falling into place as he aligned it to a specific bearing, the bearing from the osprey's nest to the lighthouse. With a final deep thud, the lock released. He lifted the heavy lid. Inside, nestled on faded velvet, were not treasures of gold or jewels, but the treasures of a life, a faded photograph of a young woman, Adam's grandmother, a set of worn dog tags belonging to his great-grandfather from the First World War, and another envelope with his name on it. He opened it. The letter was short. "Adam, if you've made it this far, you know what is at stake. The fight is yours now. Everything Thorne built is a house of cards. Here is the wind that will blow it down. Protect the legacy. Trust yourself. I am proud of you." Beneath the letter was a thick black ledger. Adam opened it. Page after page was filled with Elias's precise handwriting, detailing every one of Thorne's illegal dealings, account numbers for offshore banks, names of corrupt officials, shipping routes for smuggled arms, dates of assassinations. It was a complete and utter list of crimes for a criminal empire. This was the heart of the work, the protection. Suddenly, Ragnar, who had been standing guard at the top of the stairs, let out a low, vicious snarl. Adam looked at Elena, his eyes hard. "They're here." He grabbed the ledger, stuffed it into his waterproof pack, and slung it over his shoulder. "Get to the base of the stairs," he commanded Elena. "Stay behind me." "Ragnar, with me." He peered through one of the grimy lantern room windows. A sleek black inflatable boat was battling the waves at the base of the rock. Figures in dark tactical gear were already beginning their climb. At their lead was a man with an air of arrogant command, Marcus Thorne. The fight began on the spiral staircase. The narrow, decaying iron steps became a vertical kill area. Adam took the first two men from above, using the darkness and the element of surprise. They were expecting a fight, but not from a ghost who moved without sound and struck with brutal efficiency. A third mercenary rounded a curve below, his rifle raised. Before Adam could fire, Ragnar launched himself from the step above, a blur of fur and teeth. The dog hit the man with the force of a battering ram, sending him tumbling back down the stairs with a strangled cry. Elena, huddled at the base, proved her own toughness. As another soldier tried to rush past the chaos, she grabbed a heavy, rusted fire extinguisher from the wall and swung it with all her might into his knees, sending him crashing down. Adam worked his way down, clearing the staircase, a silent, deadly ghost in the echoing darkness of the tower. He left a trail of unconscious or disabled men behind him. The fight was swift, brutal, and one-sided. He was in his element. The confined space amplified his skills. He reached the bottom to find Elena standing over the man she had taken down, her chest heaving, the heavy extinguisher still in her hands. Ragnar stood guard beside her, growling at the open doorway. A figure stepped out of the storm and into the entrance, silhouetted against the raging sea. Marcus Thorne. He was tall, impeccably dressed despite the weather, his silver hair plastered to his head. He held a pistol with a casual ease, and his cold, intelligent eyes surveyed the scene with a flicker of annoyance, not surprise. "Impressive, Mr. Parker," Thorne said, his voice cutting through the roar of the storm. "Truly, your grandfather would be proud. A pity you inherited his sentimentality along with his skills." He glanced at the pack on Adam's back. "Oh, give me the ledger, and I will let the good doctor live." A final act of professional courtesy. Adam pushed Elena behind him. "It's over, Thorne." "Is it?" Thorne smiled, a chilling, humorless expression. He tossed his pistol aside. It clattered on the stone floor. "Your grandfather and I had our disagreements. Let's settle this the old way, man to man. The victor takes all." It was a challenge Adam couldn't refuse. He drew his combat knife. Thorne produced one of his own, a sleek modern blade. The final battle was not a flurry of action, but a deadly, calculated dance in the cramped space at the base of the lighthouse. Thorne was skilled, his movements precise and economical, the product of a lifetime in the field. But Adam was younger, stronger, and fueled by a righteous fury. It was a brutal ballet of fakes, blocks, and strikes. The clang of steel echoed off the stone walls. In the end, it was Thorne's arrogance that was his undoing. He lunged, overextending, aiming for a finishing blow. Adam pivoted, using Thorne's momentum against him, and in a single fluid motion disarmed him and drove him hard against the curved stone wall. The fight was over. Adam stood over his defeated foe, his breath coming in ragged gasps, the storm raging outside and a quiet victory settling within. The storm broke with the dawn. As the first pale, watery light of morning filtered through the grimy panes of the lantern room, the fury of the wind and sea began to subside, leaving behind a world washed clean and utterly exhausted. Adam had secured Thorne and his surviving men. Their professional arrogance was shattered, leaving only the sulky anger of defeat. Silas, true to his word, returned with the tide, his old fishing boat appearing through the receding mist like a ghost ship. The transfer of prisoners was a grim, silent affair. Adam handed Thorne over to the old sailor with a quiet instruction. "Take them to the Coast Guard station at Tillamook Bay. Tell them you found them shipwrecked. They'll figure out the rest soon enough." Silas just nodded, his pale blue eyes showing a deep, unquestioning understanding. He knew not to ask questions. Elias Parker's world had always run on a currency of trust, not explanation. As the sea serpent chugged away, carrying the remnants of Marcus Thorne's ambition back to civilization, Adam and Elena stood alone on the rock, with only Ragnar for company. The air was cold, sharp, and tasted of victory. Adam looked at Elena. Her face was smudged with dirt, her hair tangled from the wind. He had never seen anyone more beautiful. He reached out and gently touched her cheek. "You were incredible," he said, his voice raw with an emotion he rarely allowed himself to show. She leaned into his touch, a weary but genuine smile gracing her lips. "I had a good teacher." The journey back to the mainland was quiet, a time for silent contemplation. The ledger, secure in Adam's pack, felt like a heavy physical weight, a responsibility that had been passed from one generation to the next. Back in Astoria, Adam didn't go to the local authorities. Thorne's network was a web of corruption that reached into the highest levels. He couldn't risk the ledger falling into the wrong hands. Instead, he consulted his grandfather's journal one last time. Tucked into a hidden pocket in the back cover was a name and a secure contact number. General Robert Fitzpatrick, a stern old guard officer in the Department of Justice and one of the original Sentinels. The meeting was arranged for the following day in a quiet, anonymous conference room in Portland. General Fitzpatrick was a man who seemed to have been carved from granite. He was in his late 70s, with a ramrod-straight posture and eyes that had seen the best and worst of humanity and were impressed by neither. He listened without interruption as Adam laid out the events of the past week. His expression, unreadable. When Adam finished, he slid the black ledger across the polished table. Fitzpatrick opened it, his experienced eyes scanning the meticulous entries. He was silent for a long time, the only sound in the room the faint rustle of the pages turning. Finally he closed it, his hand resting on the cover. "Elias was the best of us," he said, his voice a low rumble, "the most dedicated. When he went into seclusion, we thought the fight had gone out of him. We were wrong. He was simply building his final weapon." He looked directly at Adam, his gaze sharp and judging. "This ledger will allow us to dismantle Thorne's entire operation, from top to bottom. It will be a quiet, careful operation, no headlines. But the world will be a safer place for it. Your grandfather has done this country and the world one last great service." "He told me it was a choice," Adam said, "to take up the work or walk away." "And what have you chosen?" Fitzpatrick asked, the question hanging in the air. "I'm a soldier, General," Adam replied. "The fight found me. I'm not going to walk away from it." A flicker of something, approval, respect, passed through the old general's eyes. "Good. The Sentinels have been dormant for too long. Perhaps it's time they were woken up. We'll be in touch, Mr. Parker." Adam left the meeting feeling as though a great weight had been both lifted and settled onto his shoulders. He had delivered the weapon. He had honored his grandfather's final mission. He returned to the Osprey's nest that evening to find Elena waiting for him on the deck. She had been busy. The steel shutters were pulled back, and the golden light of the setting sun poured into the main room, chasing away the last of the shadows. The scent of coffee and a crackling fire in the hearth drifted out to meet him. The fortress was gone. In its place was a home. Ragnar trotted out to greet him, nudging his hand before settling at Elena's feet. Adam walked over and stood beside her, his gaze following hers out to the vast, shimmering expanse of the Pacific. The sky was a blaze of orange, pink, and gold. "It's over," he said quietly. "No," she replied, turning to look at him, her green eyes soft in the warm light. "It's not, is it?" He knew what she meant. The fight with Thorn was over, but the work, the legacy, was just beginning. He was no longer just a Navy SEAL, an instrument of national policy. He was something else now, a sentinel, a guardian, operating in the spaces between the light and the dark. "No," he admitted, a small smile touching his lips. "It's not." He looked down at her, at the brilliant, brave woman who had faced down codes and soldiers with equal courage, who had seen the darkest parts of his world and hadn't flinched. The connection that had sparked in a dusty museum archive had been forged into something unbreakable in the hard test of the lighthouse. He didn't need to say the words. He simply lowered his head and kissed her. It wasn't a kiss of desperate passion, but one of deep, profound recognition. It was a kiss that tasted of sea salt, wood smoke, and the promise of a shared future. It was the kiss of coming home. When they broke apart, they stood in comfortable silence, watching the last sliver of the sun dip below the horizon. Ragnar rested his head on Adam's boot, a quiet, reassuring presence. Adam thought of the man who had left him this place. Elias Parker had given him more than a property, more than a mission. He had given him a purpose that extended beyond the uniform. He had given him a connection to a past he never knew and a chart for a future he had never imagined. He slipped his arm around Elena's shoulders, pulling her close. Together the three of them, the soldier, the scholar, and the faithful guardian, stood on the edge of the continent, a new family forged in secrets and bound by honor. The sea and the sky stretched out before them, vast and full of possibility. The journey was far from over. It had only just begun. If this story of courage, legacy, and purpose resonated with your spirit, please share it with someone who needs to be reminded of their own inner strength. Subscribe for more stories that honor the values of duty and faith. And let us know in the comments what is the most valuable legacy that has been passed down to you. As we close this story, let us also hold a moment of prayer. May God bless each and every one of you watching. May He grant you the clarity to see the hidden purpose in your own life, the strength to face your own battles with honor, and the wisdom to cherish the legacy you have been given. If you believe that God has a plan for you, a unique and powerful legacy for you to fulfill, write Amen in the comments below to share your faith with us all. Thank you for watching. God bless.